Well, good morning, everybody. I spent some time this weekend developing a new map that I hope puts this one into context. What it's showing is the last 7 days of total accumulated precipitation through midnight or 12 a.m. this morning here on Monday. Now, most of the pattern last week was dominated by two things. We saw a low that spent several days here over parts of the high and southern plains. It then moved into the southeast and on Sunday just ripped up the east coast where it's currently sitting today. On the back side of that, we had that kicker low we talked about, the shortwave that was sneaking down through this area that eventually helped turn this one up the coast. Other than that, we've been waiting on a low that's off of the coast of California that's finally today getting a chance to move toward California, toward Oregon, and even into Nevada. Now, what I worked on was I wanted to know how well a week ago when I was talking to you at this point did the models forecast this. All right, so I'm only going to show you the ECMWF because I only wrote code to do that. But this next map is going to illustrate what we saw compared to what we forecast. So what I did was I took the previous map and I subtracted from it the week ago forecast from the ECMWF. Now, I just quickly threw this together, so it's not all pretty and easy to read just yet. So I just want you to know this. The blues, which is represented in inches here, okay, is where the model was dry. So when you compare it to what actually happened, everywhere there's blue, reality was wetter than what the model projected. So notice the model was wetter through here. And it was wetter Florida and up the east coast just offshore. Remember, we were talking about a comparison between where the GFS put its precipitation versus the European versus the other models, the machine learning models. And I said at the end of the week, the best thing would have been to blend them, right? Because the GFS was really wet in through here, but also wet in through there. And the reality was it was a good idea to blend them because this is the area right in through here where the models, the ECMWF, specifically did not do a great job of predicting the precipitation a week ago. So this is a 7-day-old analysis. And I just want to illustrate that that's how much things can shift around this time of year, any time of year, honestly. And for many of us throughout the Midwest, for folks out here in the plains, this was much wetter than anticipated a week ago. So the system became more amplified and it just had more juice to work with. So again, major misstep right into here. Now this was important because I'm sure you saw in the news the other day some of the flooding that happened. Like this is a map that goes through 5 a.m. this morning, just looking at the last 72 hours of total accumulated precipitation. And we've got a big section here of South Carolina. Look at this strip in through here, picking up greater than 6 inches of rainfall. And there was a lot of local flooding happening in the Carolinas coming out of Georgia and Florida over the weekend. Well, I'm recording this a little bit later than I like because I was still tweaking some on that map, but you're seeing this morning as the sun is rising where that deep low is this morning. And my goodness, if we saw something like this and there was actually cold air to work with, this would have been a pretty powerful nor'easter. You can already see the colder air arriving on the backside. See the cloud streets forming just offshore here. But yesterday, as this one was taken off, a couple of the neat things to point out here. You can still see some of the snow in North Dakota. We have questions as to whether or not we can melt all that off. And then we will also talk today about the just tremendously dense fogs that have been in the Pacific Northwest. And you can see at the end of this animation, there is the low coming into California. This is infrared imagery from overnight, and that's the one we're talking about right now, delivering some of that moisture into California. So last 10, 12 hours or so of radar kind of showing those two pieces at work. But there's another component to this flow that we have to talk about today. There was a deepening, a pretty rapid deepening of this low as it's moved over the last 24 hours up the coast. And the colder air on the back side of it is going to be supporting some pretty intense snow squalls right in through this area. You may have heard about this in the news last night or something, but yeah, we're going to watch this pretty carefully for very intense, brief snow squalls. Convection, so this is going to be snow coming from convective clouds, the bubbly type, right? And it's going to come through here and potentially be feel very much like Christmas, I'll tell you that much. But then what we're going to have to watch after this is how much more moisture do we get from the system coming through California, and then when's the next system going to be able to get over the Rocky Mountains and get going. So let's get into all of it, all right? So first of all, here's the two main parts we're going to be watching today. So here's the first low running up the east coast, the second low that's coming on shore today. And in the middle, look at this flow coming on the backside of this very cold air sinking pretty far down south. And in the meantime, downslope winds coming off the Rockies are going to really warm up parts of the western and high plains today and tomorrow. And I'll be looking forward to showing you those temperatures in a few moments here. But as it stands this morning, about 6:05 when I was recording, this is the latest I've got from the National Weather Service on the hazard. Let's go west to east. A couple of areas of winter weather advisory, some stronger winds in Northern California, but all of this is fog. We then get over here and we start to see some wind issues, but we also see all this blue representing winter weather advisories, including off the tip of Lake Michigan and Erie, winter storm warnings. That's what those pinks represent. We're still dealing with a lot of flooding, very strong winds up against the Appalachian Mountains, and it got pretty cold. Look at this. They put out a frost watch down here in parts of Georgia and Florida multiple times this year. We've been able to get some pretty cold air down there. It's not lasted long, but it's gotten down there. So here we go. This is starting off about 7 o'clock, about an hour from now. As we play this forward, just heavy rains pulling into the rest of New England. And then you'll watch all day long. You're going to have to watch the radar to get an accurate representation of where this is going to be. But this is where we have the risk of the lake effect, part of this, plus the snow squalls coming into this side of the eastern Corn Belt, butting up against the Appalachian Mountains here. So this is through this afternoon, getting into this evening. High pressure then builds in behind this, and things quiet down for a bit across much of the eastern two-thirds of the country. Now, I'm going to take you back because I don't want to ignore what's going on in the west. Multiple rounds throughout the day today, into tonight, getting into tomorrow morning, of heavy rain coming through. The problem is, though, the trajectory coming in like this represents also where there's quite a bit of mild air. So this is not a major snowmaker as we play through the middle of this week for the Sierra Nevada or for the Cascade Mountains. Now, to put all this in context, I want to toss in a couple of different maps here. The first map is going to be a map that goes from October 1 to December 17. This is what we call our water year map. The water year in the United States starts on October 1st and goes to September 30th. Part of the reason we do that is because of the western United States wet season. Now, if you look back since the beginning of basically October, we've been very dry in parts of the Mid-South and Midwest, getting into the Southeast and a few pockets into New England here. We've also been dry in California, Arizona, Nevada, Utah. This has been an area that's not yet been able to get into that subtropical jet stream moisture. So some of the rainfall that's coming in right now is some of the first good rains we've seen in California. Now remember, this is a pretty long time period over which we're looking, October 1st to December 17th. So some folks are like, wait a minute, we've been dry for a while. Well, I understand that, but we had systems that came through in October, November that are creating the distribution you're seeing here on this precipitation ranks map. If we look at just what's happened since the start of the month, now you can start to pick out those drier areas right in through here as well, versus who's been extremely wet most of this last week and some of this yesterday. And of course, when we get the new data in, we'll start to add up how much wetter things have been up the East Coast as of late. But this is going to change quite a bit over here on the West Coast in the next 10 to 15 days, as really the pattern in the West Coast is going to favor a flip-flop between who was wet at the beginning of the month and who's going to be wet at the end of the month here. So another way to look at this is starting on the same date. So this will begin on October 1. This is the season-to-date percent of normal snowfall. And I was just thinking about how we've had a couple of big events, like one that came out of Montana, hit North Dakota. We had that big event several weeks ago that came into parts of Kansas and Missouri. And of course, over the course of last week, we saw the heavy snows that came into southern Colorado, New Mexico, parts of Texas, and Oklahoma. Now, overall, when I kind of get a good look at this map, I do see more red than anything else. And that's mostly because of this. It's just to point out we can get snows down into this area this time of year, but it's quite rare. But the West really has had a bit of a slow start. And every time we've had big snows in the Cascades has been followed by warmer air and some rain. So we need to see, a change over to a true winter pattern. And I was thinking about that, and I wanted to bring up something. This is just for the whole contiguous United States. And we're looking at the month of December, and this is with respect to precipitation. Now, if you just average the whole United States, all right, and go back to the year 1895 up until last year, this is what December's precipitation volatility looks like. But what I wanted to focus in on was the trend. Now, I just set the start of the trend to be 1970. But since 1970, we've actually been getting slightly wetter. How much? A little more than 1/3 of an inch. When you average that over an entire country, that's a good upward trend overall in the precipitation. So I just thought it would be good to add some context to this. I think a lot of you would probably like to see the same thing on temperatures, because since the start of December, it has been extremely mild almost everywhere in the United States. Now you're going, wait a minute, we've had a lot of cold air down here. I understand, but we've also had mild days to balance this out. So that's why you see nearly every climate reporting district either at average or on the much warmer than average side of the distribution of temperatures going back to 1893. Now, thinking about this, I want to kind of talk about it in two different ways. I want to talk about it with respect to long-term trend, and I also want to talk about it with respect to El Nino. So have a look at this. This would be the same graphic I just showed you, but instead of looking at precipitation, we're now looking at temperature. It's the whole U.S. except for Alaska and Hawaii. And as we look at it, quite a bit of volatility in our December temperatures. But since 1970, again, just picked the year to start the analysis, we've actually had a pretty significant upward trend in in average temperature. And you say, how much? Well, it's honestly about, it's 4.5, 5 degrees. So we're much warmer in December, which means more often than not over the last 30, 40 years, we've felt what I've been talking about is this back half weighted winter. That's why I've had quite a bit of confidence in telling you that. December isn't the month this year to see just big time winter systems rolling through. It's going to be a back half weighted. And just a quick anecdote, it's kind of interesting. We have a guy that lives in my hometown, Mahomet, Illinois, who decorates his house like Clark W. Griswold. And went out and saw it with my kids, and my son says, "Who's Clark W. Griswold?" So I let my kids watch National Lampoon's Christmas Vacation, which was quite entertaining for my wife and I. And there's a part where Clark W. Griswold's up in his attic watching the video of Christmas, and there was always snow and all the time. And my son just goes, "Dad, did you used to have a lot of snow on the ground at Christmas?" I said, "Well, I showed him the graphic. I said, well, back when I was born back here, I was born in 1980, in case you wanted to know. I said, yeah, well, we did tend to have a bit more snow, but the climatological shifts we've been seeing has actually pushed winter just later. We just have to recognize these seasonal shifts and understand them." So anyway, I thought that was kind of interesting, and that's why I wanted to toss this in today. Okay, back to it. This is the other thing I want to discuss, El Nino. We made a case last week that El Nino's plateaued, and some of the new evidence here continues to show that. So notice the ocean temperatures right out there in the middle of the equatorial Pacific continuing to kind of flatline here at about 1.5 degrees above average. But the big questions remain. How much influence do we get with the colder water here, part of the negative PDO? This is the negative PMM. It's also a part of that same system. And kind of where is this going? So last week I showed you that it's plateaued. We then looked at the fact that the CPC is considering keeping El Nino conditions around all the way through probably early spring, but a fade through spring. And then by the time we get into summer, we'll be talking about neutral conditions, possibly even La Nina coming in. Showed it to you a couple of different ways. Like here's the CFSV2, there's your fade through spring, neutral by the beginning of next summer, and then by maybe next fall we're getting into La Nina conditions. Just kind of overly thinking this right now, but concerned if this maintains its warm bias, that positive Atlantic meridional mode, then this could be a setup for next year to be very active with respect to tropical cyclones, especially in the Gulf coming out of the Western Atlantic. So I just wanted to make sure we know we're talking about that going forward. But all of this needs to be put into the context of, all right, is this winter behaving like El Nino? So we say this, what is December since 1960? Okay, so December since 1960 with El Ninos look like? They tend to be cooler southwest across the southern tier of the U.S., more mild north. So you're going to go, sure, yeah. I just want to make a different case. You know that I've been complaining for weeks about the deep troughs of cold air over Alaska. You can get this same pattern from that. So it's a combination. It's been a combination of El Nino and the support of the deep trough of cold air over Alaska that's just flooded much of central North America with mild air. Now, if you're curious on the precipitation side of it, December's, which remember, we still have more time in December here to go, 12, 13 days left of the month. You can see that those December's, when there's been El Nino since 1960, tended to be drier, Oregon, Northern California. Now, are we going to be there by the end of the month? No, we won't. We won't be on the drier side of average here. We're bringing in quite a bit of precipitation. This, though, didn't happen. So you say those El Ninos tended to give us better moisture into these areas. And this past weekend did. We have another chance here coming late. I'll show you that in about 10 days. But some of it fits El Nino, some of it doesn't. I think the more dominant feature has been the Gulf of Alaska trough. So we can play this game, though. Well, we know El Nino is going to plateau and remain for the beginning of the new year. So what about January and February? We tended to split the west, drier north and wetter south. And we tend to be drier kind of into this side of the Midwest, Eastern Great Lakes, Ohio Valley, and wet south of that. But one thing's for sure that we've talked a lot about is that we tend to get, there it is, that back half weighted shot at some much colder air. So this means that the likelihood of seeing colder air colder than climatological averages arriving in January to February is relatively high. So we'll watch this carefully because it would suggest a bit of a pattern shift as we go forward. Now, when? I don't think it's coming anytime soon, like true Arctic air coming anytime soon, but it tends to happen once you get past the middle of January. All right, so where's the problem child? It's right up here. It's this trough in the Gulf of Alaska. And as I play this forward, look at this. I'll just go out really quickly through the next 10 to 15 days. Did you see that? I mean, 10 days out, it's still there. So what do we end up getting? Big ridging events that happen in the midsection of the country. And as a result, yeah, the Pacific jet still extends, but we get these troughs that go down south of it. And these are the ones I like to see if you're up the East Coast. Yeah, bring it on. Let's get this going here by the end of the year and just rip off systems up the East Coast. But man, that is going to be producing multiple rounds of some pretty mild air kind of floating through the middle part of North America. Now, there could be a couple places over the next 2 weeks that will get cooler than average. But overall, I think we're going to be paying attention to more mild air throughout central North America. I will be watching the day after Christmas, and the reason for that is some of the new ensemble members have really kind of favored dropping a trough of low pressure underneath this ridge here. So do you see, what did I complain about all last 2 weeks? Northwest flow. Now do you see what the northwest flow is? It's in Canada. And now we get here, southwest flow. See that? So if this verifies, again, this is, the day after Christmas. Oh man, we can finally get a system to rip off here in the midsection of the country that starts to hit those drier areas we keep talking about. But watch Alaska most carefully. I will note this. The ensemble's way out here. This is December 31st, getting to January 1st. There seems to be a bit of a retrograde of this ridge. Now, I don't know if that's an artifact in the models or if it's possibly representing reality, but where that ridge had been in the central part of North America, it's now retrograded back. And if we can get it to set up over Alaska, watch this. You bring in a ridge to Alaska and a ridge into Greenland, it will be game on for Arctic air to come into the United States. And for those that want winter big time, that's what you need to watch happen. Okay, so with all of that as a backdrop, let's walk through the models here. The next 7 days from the WPC. This isn't coming anytime soon. All the stuff in the west, yes. The stuff coming into Arizona, desperately needed, yes. But what we're going to be watching here is going to be late in the time period coming through the forecast. So there's the snow squalls today, the system leaving New England. We're drier throughout Canada. Why? Northwest flow. But remember that trough I showed you about a week from now? Sneaking out, that's when it starts to open up this corridor for better precipitation. Is it in the models? Yeah. So let's compare the GFS 0Z to the European 0Z. Where I've already watched through here, there's the snow squalls we talked about. You can see the coastal low coming into California. Boy, that's going to add up through the beginning of this week. And then we get out there and that low sneaks down into Southern California, and look at it coming through Arizona. This is desperately needed moisture coming into this area. So I just took you all the way out to Friday, and I did that because most of the rest of the country's got nothing coming until Friday except for the snow squalls today. By the time we get into Friday night, there's a system coming in the northwest, and as that low sneaks down here, this is just the beginning of turning the flow around. So you start to see this Friday the risk of some showers and storms coming out here into the southern plains, mid-south, over toward the Mississippi River. But the deeper upper level wave comes out on Saturday into Sunday. And that's when we start to really bake in the likelihood of this deeper low somewhere here. I don't know where it's going to be just yet. I mean, you saw how poorly the models handled last week's system, and I felt much better about that one. But sometime out here next Monday, Sunday night, Monday morning, that's going to come across the country. It is currently being resolved in both models, and it is in the ensembles as well. Now, at the very end of this, on the 27th and 28th, that's the jet extension we've been talking about for 10 days coming into California. So before I get there, let's go ahead and look at some of the maps. Let's add up precip from the ECMWF. Now remember, this is all this morning. There's the snow squalls following it. We're already through Thursday. Here it is. There's Friday, getting into Saturday, Sunday. I don't know, let's stop at 174 hours. So that is the current update from the GFS, European model. Here's the GFS. Friday, Saturday, Sunday, we'll stop it at the same spot, which is right there. Here's the two models. So you can see there's agreement on something coming here after we get all the rain this week in California, and the low cuts off over the Baja, comes into Arizona, the wave hits the northwest, and that's our next system here. GFS again. The GraphCast model, this is through the next 7 days. In fact, we better, just to be consistent, bump this out one more time step. There you go. You can also see the same features, but watch what GraphCast does. As I get you all the way out here, there it goes. That's what it's attempting to do days 7 to 10 in the midsection of the country. Yeah, I got to watch this. Look at the southeast as well. West Coast wet, jet extension shows up. I mean, this will be fun to watch because we need this moisture in a big way here to finish off this month. And by the way, watch the GFS. It just goes crazy. There we go. I mean, we're just taking this out. It's bringing in lots and lots of moisture. And just so you know, the European does this too. So just some stuff to keep an eye on here as we go forward. Snowy side of this, you did see some blue on that map. Let's go ahead and have a look at what we're expecting for that system next week to deliver some snow. Now, this isn't going to verify, but it's trying to bring in some good snows on the backside of this. And the GFS not only wants to do that, but bring in enough cold air to support some good snows in the Rockies as well. It's a little bit different placement on where it's going to be, but just want to let you know that we could, despite the mild forecast, get enough cold air in here to get some snow. Now, I keep talking about that jet extension. Here it is on Christmas. It's still working its way over. And as we play this out through the 26th, 27th, 28th, I just want to illustrate a point here. Where the main body of the jet stream flow is located is here. We tend to get a split and coming over the top like that. So that's why we continue to stay dry in the Canadian Prairie and pockets of the northern plains and the northwest. So through the next 5 days, here's your chance of getting an inch. Now watch. If we add in day 5 through 10, that's what it looks like. So we really bring in this second system late this weekend, next week, into the midsection of the country. Here's the best chance of getting 2 inches of liquid out of this. So mainly it's a system today in the northeast, what's coming into California now, and then you can see this system early next week emerging in the southern plains, Midwest region. Who's going to be drier? This is what I don't think I'll surprise anybody with. The drier conditions across the Canadian Prairie, too much northwest flow. I mean, it's been the same story for a while. Okay, from there, let's look at some snowfall maps. This is the probability over the next 10 days of getting an inch. So where you saw some of the operational ones like dropping a bunch of snow into this, no, we have to use the ensembles at this point to assess where the snow is going to be. Okay, from here, I want to take this out a little farther. The CPC released their newest week 3, week 4 forecast for December 30th through January 12th. And the point here is just to continue to show that they're expecting this subtropical jet to dominate. And there's still more risk of that northwest flow coming in. So you got this, and then the polar jet, it's coming in out of this direction. There's a lot of good reason to believe that this could be the case given what we know right now about where the MJO is, and also El Nino, and the trends we've seen as of late. So just want to give you one more piece on the precip. This is from the new 1-month outlook from the European model through January, and green is wetter than average, and we see a lot of wet conditions across the southern tier of the U.S. And so it's kind of supportive of what I just showed you a moment ago. Now, we got to talk about the temperatures because watch this. There's today's highs getting into tomorrow on Tuesday. Now, how often can you say that, it's going to be warmer in Great Falls, Montana than it is in Atlanta? I mean, that's impressive to see this temperature gradient. Very mild downslope flow coming off of the Rocky Mountains. It's very warm air, compressionally warm. So there's Wednesday into Thursday and Friday, the large ridges in place here at this point, getting into Saturday and Sunday, Christmas Eve. I mean, to be in the 50s on Christmas Eve is pretty impressive. Now, where does this all go after that? Well, there's your next 5 days. But day 5 through 10, it vects or moves that warmth east. And then you're going to notice day 10 through 15, some colder air beginning to show up across the south. Now, why is that the case? Well, remember, our flow's coming across. There's a subtropical piece here, and then there's the ridge that comes over like that. So this is why it's cooler down here. We have this subtropical branch. It's bringing in clouds and precipitation, but central North America is just locked into some really mild air overall. So where is it all going? This was a bit of an interesting development over the weekend. Remember how I told you the MJO stalled out here? And it wasn't just coming on nice around like this. Well, the newest forecasts are attempting to pop this out into phase 1. Where's that? That's Africa. And if the MJO pops out over Africa, we know a bit about that in the month of January. It tends to give us this flow. Now look, does this look familiar? So does this flow progress just like history would tell us, splitting across this section of the United States, which would really send lots of lows that come along the south and race up the East Coast, but more persistent ridging in the midsection of the country? Possibly. But what I like seeing about this pattern is you start developing deep Gulf of Alaska troughs, not Alaska troughs, but Gulf of Alaska troughs. The pattern stands the chance of spinning around and get going. The other part of this flow, once this resets, there you go, is where the polar vortex is located. This long time period of big troughs in Gulf of Alaska have sitting on top of them in the stratosphere ridging, and that's perturbed and pushed the polar vortex over to Greenland. And right now, it is weakening. See this forecast line right here? Climatological averages here. Remember, weakened polar vortexes are the type that can sometimes link up with the tropospheric vortex and drop really, really cold air. Watch that carefully over the next, I'll watch it and keep telling you about it. So that's going to be a big piece of this pattern going forward as well. But we need to review what the longer range models are suggesting, because I got one new one to add to it. So this is the January, February, March outlook for precipitation anomalies: green, wet, brown, dry. We've already looked at this. We also looked at the January, February, March from the National Multi-Model Ensemble. They both say the same thing. The risk is here for drier conditions. The risk is drier for parts of the Pacific Northwest and British Columbia. I would extend this dry risk into the northern plains, wet and wet. You say, what does that look like? That looks exactly like El Nino. I would tell you the models are hung up on El Nino. But I'm telling you, watch Alaska. If the Alaska trough becomes the Alaska ridge, I don't care what El Nino's doing. It's going to change everything with this pattern. And here's the newest one to add to it. This came from the IRI Multi-Model Probability Forecast System. This is run out of Columbia University. This is a statistical forecast approach using the NMME. And it's got a similar story. Not quite as dry as some of the models in the Mid-South, getting up to the Ohio Valley. And it backed off on the dryness it had in the Pacific Northwest compared to previous forecasts. But it's got the same story as to where they're expecting it to be wet. But again, very El Nino-like forecast. Watch the Gulf of Alaska. I got one last thing I want to share with you today, and that's a little bit of an international update. The new European model continues to be very generous with the rainfall over the next 10 days in the places that are desperate for it. We talked about this all week last week, but I want to talk to you about Argentina. Major severe weather outbreak happened over the weekend down here, and in addition to that, they're expecting more rain along the Paraná River and into Argentina, which is important because remember, last year Argentina's total crop production was cut in half. Now, with these rains coming through this part of Brazil, first of all, what are the likelihood of this happening? Because remember, the Europeans been over-predicting. But if they do manifest themselves, this will really go a long way to kind of stop the bleeding with respect to this crop in Brazil. So the ensembles are back to their old tricks. This is the latest European ensemble. It's now limited the really dry conditions to this part of like Tocantins, Para, and the corner of Mato Grosso. But it tried to return all weekend in each new model run wetter conditions all throughout here while keeping it very wet. Paraguay, parts of northern Argentina. They desperately need this rainfall down here. They don't need it in southern Brazil, but they need it here in Argentina. What did the GFS do? It's like, nope, big area of drier conditions right into this pocket. Now, remember, we have to keep dry relative because it's common to get somewhere between 3 and 4 inches of rain a week, right where I wrote this. So if you look down here and you see that they're going to be off by 40 to 50 millimeters, that's 2 inches. If they're expecting 3 to 4, that means they're getting, a third to half of that. And so we just need to understand if that is enough to sustain the crop or not. It's all about temperatures, and we do see some warmer temperatures coming into this region during that time frame. So we're continuing to watch this model battle in Brazil. And lastly, I just want to give you a little bit of an international outlook. Very wet once again. Queensland, New South Wales, Victoria, Tasmania. This is very uncharacteristic of an El Nino. You can see some better rains trying to get into the southern half of Africa. Europe stays quite wet, but take a look at what's going to happen throughout Russia. Remember at the beginning of this month, all we could talk about was how cold it was in Russia. They've now gone over very, very warm. This is the beginning of a shift that we think will manifest itself later in January in terms of the temperature redistribution across the northern hemisphere. Where'd all the cold air go? Well, it's in China. It's coming up here through Japan and getting right over here, trying to bridge its way over to Alaska. But it got to get, warmth into this area in order for us to break down the big ridge, the trough that's in Alaska and replace it with a ridge. So the cold air is in Greenland, where the polar vortex is currently sitting. So with that, I just want to give a quick announcement. I will forecast all week long, but I'm going to take some time off next week just to spend with family between Christmas and New Year, so I will not be producing forecast videos. I have some vacation I need to use, and I'd like to use it. So I'll talk to you all week long, but we're going to take next week off, and we'll pick back up on January 2nd. All right, so talk to you then, or I'll talk to you tomorrow, and we'll have a good rest of this week. Thanks.